All right, everybody, back with another one. Today is going to be a very special episode because it is the official 100th episode of the podcast. We've been doing this a little bit over a year now and have put out a podcast just about every week, sometimes multiple in a week, sometimes we skipped a week, but we have actually made it to 100 episodes right now. So it's a big day for the podcast, breaking that 100 episode milestone. Today we're going to talk about a couple different topics. We're going to take a look at the Supreme Court decisions. They're not official yet, but the courts are reviewing a couple of different things that Trump has, going on. And we're going to take a look at those. We're going to take a look at Mamdani, who has officially won. He is the New York City mayor. He has become the first Muslim and the first communist mayor of New York City, and probably the first of both of those to be a mayor of any city in America, officially declared. But we're going to take a look at one particular thing that he said about real estate and landlords, and we're going to see his stance on that and then talk a little bit about the legality of it. And if we have some more time, we'll take a look at a couple of different other things, particularly Trump recently said that he might be giving the dividend dollar to people sooner rather than later, and he has an exact amount that he has officially stated he is probably going to release to the public. So we will be taking a look at all of that. But we're going to jump right now into the Mamdani thing and start from there.
Starting on day one, we will expand the city's special enforcement programs, doubling fines for hazardous violations and tripling them for conditions that are immediately dangerous. And when a really bad landlord, like this guy, refuses to fix it, the city's going to step in, make the repairs, and send them the bill.
Okay, watch next.
If that doesn't work, the city's taking over the building. We're putting the worst landlords out of business.
He says, we're going to.
So there you have it. It was just a quick clip, little less than a minute, probably 30 seconds. There's a longer clip online, but I just wanted to get to the highlighted points. You have the new New York City mayor, who is, like I said, the first declared communist to actually be the mayor of New York City. He is right out of the gates professing his communist principles without shame. He is telling people that he is looking to confiscate property from landlords. And that is something that is out of the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx. It is one of the rules that you have to follow in order to move a nation to communism, is to take their property. Nobody will be entitled to their own property, their own land, their own anything. Everything will be on borrowed capacity in some way from the government. And, you basically will live your life just using things. You'll be a user, and you will have the right to use those things, but only because the government grants you the right to use them, not because God had given you the inherent right to have those things because he gave them to us, or he set up the mechanisms that allowed those things to come to fruition. Like, he didn't give us a house, but he gave us the ability to build a house with our hands. And so because we can do that, we have the right to have a home. But the land God did put here for us. So we have dominion over the land. We have dominion over the animals. We essentially own them. Now, they do belong to God, but we have the right to do whatever we want with them as long as we are staying within the parameters that God set. Like, you can't just, abuse animals and things like that, but you have dominion over them. You can have a farm, raise chickens, raise cows, use them for their, eggs and milk. And then when they're no longer able to produce, you can, slaughter them and eat them as a meal. You can use their, skin essentially as clothing material. Like, we have that right. We have the same right with land. We can use the land for what we want to use it for. We can dig down to, as far as we can go, to the depths of whatever we can go on our land. We can tap into a spring and, hook it up so that we have, essentially free water that's naturally occurring within the earth. We can also put, some sort of invention like a Tesla wheel or something a little bit more modern into the ground and harness the electricity and have free electricity. We can, set up all different types of mechanisms on our property to utilize the things that God has given us the ability to have. So we have the right to have free energy. We have the right to absorb the energy from the sun through solar panels and power our home for free. We have that right because God gave us that right, not because the government gives us that right. What communism teaches is that you don't have any rights. You have whatever the government allows you to have. You have the abilities that the government grants you. And if at any time they decide to rescind that offer, they have the right to do that and you can't do anything about it. That is not God's way. Communism comes from the devil. It is not a societal structure that it comes from God in any way. And the reason you know is because it actually contradicts the very nature of God. It contradicts what is in the Bible. The communist principles, you can compare them to the Bible, and they don't line up. So that should tell you everything you need to know about communism. It is not biblically sound. It does not come from God. It comes from evil. And when you really look at that and compare it to, you know, evil things like the Satanic Bible and other evil doctrine. Communist Manifesto lines up a lot more with those things. So that's another credible piece of evidence that it does not come from God and does in fact come from the devil. So starting out with that, we know that communism is evil. And anybody who wants to bring communism to America is acting on an evil agenda. You know, it's not about politics, it's not about money. It is coming from a place of evil. It is set up to destroy this nation. Now, why this nation? Well, you know, they've done this to many nations in the past throughout history, so it's not like they're just targeting America. But America, as I've said many times in the past on this show, it was created by God. It was founded as the first nation for Christians to call home. It was a nation that was literally designed for Christians specifically. And the purpose was so that they could have the freedom of religion, the freedom to practice their faith without having anybody, you know, tyrannically come down on them and stop them from doing that. And the reason God set that up is so important. It was because America was going to be used as a microphone, as a megaphone, as a way to get the gospel out to the world. Because in the Bible it says Jesus will not return until the gospel has been spread to all four corners of the earth. So America's mission was to be the megaphone that would get it there. And at this point, you know, America has fallen away from that, but there is a revival. We are coming back. But either way, that was our original purpose. That's what God created America for. So we had a mission. That's why he gave us all these freedoms. That's why he granted us this beautiful landmass that is one of the top 5 biggest countries in the world and has all of the natural resources that any country needs. It has all the different types of ecosystems, whether it's deserts or mountains or lakes or oceans or whatever. It's all here in this one country. And you can travel freely in your car throughout it and do whatever you want to do and see whatever you want to see, and nobody can stop you. The reason we were given such that beautiful freedom is because we were also tasked with a big responsibility. So America is naturally and inherently a non-communist country. You have this mayor coming in and he's a outright outspoken communist. His mission is to destroy the American way of life. Now, who's working with him and who's he working for? We don't know just yet. There is some rumblings that he was, you know, he has some big backers that have been trying to destroy this country for a long time. So it's possible that, you know, he's working with them or they're, you know, funding him to try and further the agenda because they want to see the same thing happen. Regardless, he's still doing this, even if he's just acting on his own accord. And now that he's won, he's going to do damage to New York City. He's going to make some progress. He's definitely going to be held up in certain regards because he does need the Governor Hochul to approve certain things since she has dominion over the city from the state level. And you do have other layers of, you know, government that and the judicial system that will be able to stop some of his agenda. But he doesn't seem like a stupid person, and whoever he's working with that's advising him probably isn't stupid either. They are going to find ways to do certain things. So in the video you saw that he said, you know, we're going to double the code violation penalty. What that means is the city is a municipality and they basically have a code, not really of ethics, but like their own rules for operating within the confounds of the city. And essentially he's talking about the building codes. It's upkeep for the building. All the landlords throughout the city are required to follow the same code. Every city has a code, every major city at least, but every city probably does by this point. And everybody's required to, keep things a certain way so that it's maintained well enough to where it's not an endangerment to anybody. You reduce the liability risks that are out there as much as possible, and so many other factors, because a lot of this just evolved over time with so many things going wrong with people not maintaining things. So the codes themselves are not bad. A lot of them are in place to actually help people. Like you have fire life safety codes. These codes are to protect people from the landlord not taking care of the building and then the building burning down and killing everybody inside of it. Well, we wouldn't want that. We also wouldn't want a building that was not structurally built the right way. So, one day it just falls down and kills everybody because, it failed, right? We don't want that. So we do need a code. We do need a set of rules where, the government inspectors get involved and they make sure that things are being kept well and everybody's following the rules to protect everybody involved. So they give violations, which is basically they charge you essentially a tax. It's a fee that you owe if you don't stick to the plan. If they tell you you have, a code violation, you need to correct it. It could be anything. It could be expired fire extinguishers. It could be your building needs some sort of major structural engineering to fix something with the foundation or with the bricks, the masonry. So you would have to get that work done in order to be compliant. And then if you don't get it done, you get another fee on top of that. And a lot of times the fees just keep adding up until you owe a lot of money. And if you don't get it fixed, they put a lien against your building and you cannot sell the building until the lien is paid. So even if you do sell the building, they take a portion of your profits and they pay the, fines back. And then whatever the difference is, you get to keep as profit. So that's how it's always been done. What he's saying is we're going to change it. We're going to double the fees, which already is very high because New York's a very expensive city and the fees are already very high. And then we're going to, if you don't get it done by a certain deadline and pay the fee, we're going to come in and do the work ourselves, which has never been done before. The city has never gone into a building and got the work done and then sent the bill to the landlords. That is unheard of. I don't think it's ever been done in any city in America up until this point. I mean, it may be an isolated incidents where they had no choice because the building, was condemned or something and the landlord still owned it, but it was such a big hazard that they had no choice. I don't know. I've never heard of any cases like that. And maybe I'm wrong, but on a general basis, that's never been done before. Just that alone is already something new. And they would just typically keep fining you until you racked up a ton of fines. And then just like parking tickets and speeding tickets, right? You ever see people who pop open their glove compartment and they had a bunch of tickets pop out because they just weren't paying them? You just keep getting them. They don't go away. They stay at your property, against your property on the record until they're paid. And so that's how it's always been done. And eventually the landlords, would want to sell for some reason, and they knew that they had to pay that fine. And the government knew eventually they would get that money because at some point when the landlord did sell, they would see it then because you can't go through with that transaction until the fines are paid. But this is a totally new thing that the mayor was actually come in, have a company do the work, and then bill you for it, which also is another problem because typically how it works is landlords and companies that are involved in this type of business, they will get multiple bids from different contractors and go with typically, not always, but a lot of times the lowest bidder. So they have a chance to save money on the job. The government's not going to do that because they don't have that type of time and manpower to be able to shop around a bunch of bids and find the best one and analyze them and make sure that they're all the same and you're actually getting the lowest price for the correct job and so many other factors that fall into place with that. They're not going to do that. They're going to go with whoever is a government contractor and, has these type of government, affiliations. They're going to go with their people, and their people are probably going to charge a ton of money because people do this all the time to the government. I mean, the military was notorious for this. They would, a screw would cost $10,000 and they would pay it because they wanted to pretend that they were getting the best thing ever by putting a high ticket number on it or some backdoor fraud, whatever. The government would just have one of their affiliates do the job at whatever the highest price was because they don't care. It's not their money. And they would bill the landlord back when the landlord could probably have gotten that job done for half or a quarter of what the government's contractor would charge. And this happens often in that regard. Not to mention the government's probably going to use union people. A lot of times landlords will use non-union people because they can't afford the union people. And they'll skirt around it because they just don't want to deal with the unions anyway. So that adds to it. You're going to end up paying a lot more money for a union government contractor to come in and fix that thing. And it will cost you probably 2 to 3 times at bare minimum what it would cost to just do the job on your own as a landlord. Then on top of that, if you're still not getting it done, which again is already well beyond that they did the work and then charge you back for it, or just, build you directly or whatever. So now you owe all these fines and you owe the money for the job, whatever the project was. If you don't pay that at a certain deadline, they're going to now take your building from you. Now that is unheard of. And I don't think that's ever been done in American history. Again, isolated incidents, if your building is condemned or it's a slum house and they did it through the courts because you were committing crimes on the property, that's a different situation. But if you are just running a building, you're the landlord, you own it, and it's not up to code by what the government says, because also, too, they just make up these codes. Some of them are BS, some of them are legitimate, and they actually are good for the city and the people. And they could just make up random codes and say, you're not adhering to the code. We're going to, fine you. And if you don't pay it, we're going to, do all kinds of stuff. And then if you still don't play ball, we're going to take your building from you. That is unheard of, and that's ridiculous. But there's actually a couple different ways they can do it. Now, technically, they can't because you have the right to own property in America, and nobody can take that from you. In fact, you have the right to outright own property and not pay any property tax and not have, you can't have any loans against it. You would have to own it outright cash. You have the right to have a grant deed instead of a warranty deed where you own it and there's nobody that can take it from you and you can't even sell it. You would have to grant it to someone else. But people don't do that today, especially in the cities, especially New York City. They all follow the modern way of doing things where they get mortgages on the property. They have a warranty deed. They don't even hold the deed until they pay down the mortgage and they end up, owning it outright. And then they still pay property tax indefinitely forever to the government, even though it's their property. So the city operates differently than a lot of the rest of the country. And it's very hard to fight that system because it's been in place so long. And Americans have just kind of been going and playing ball, even though they really shouldn't be. And they should be banding together and standing against this corrupt system. Nobody does anything about it. There is a couple different ways. Now, one way I'm definitely familiar with. The other ways I'm not as familiar with, but I understand that this is something that he can do, and he would have to invoke it, and he would have to follow through with it, and adhere to a certain plan, but could maybe get it done. The first way is something called eminent domain. This is when the government can take your property, technically by force, but it's because there is a bigger, greater cause for the community or for the state or for the township or whatever as a whole. It's going to benefit people on a mass scale. And it's designed and set up so that the people can't be selfish and say they claim to something all for themselves when we all have to share this country. So it actually is a good thing. It would be like if one person's house is in the middle of a field and it's the only way the highway could get built is to cut through that field and go right on top of their house with the highway. But it's going to allow, millions of people to travel every day to wherever they have to go way quicker than taking all the back roads. It's going to open up all types of growth and innovation for the country. So you could do this too. You could look at this statistically and see throughout time different maps. Civilizations always grow wherever there's naturally occurring water and wherever there's highways. Wherever those two things exist, you will see populations spread like a wildfire. It takes time, it could be a 100-year time lapse, but they always grow around those areas. So it does help growth. It does help innovation. It does help, populate areas. If there's a town that really, maybe has like a population of 250 people and it's not making any money and everybody's poor, if you set up a highway that lets people off there, put up a gas station there, people start building businesses around it, and then eventually your town is thriving and it's making money and it's providing people with a way of life, providing them with an income to feed their families and live a decent life, have the American dream. So eminent domain is a good thing to a certain degree when the government doesn't abuse it, but it's for things like that. But it's also for other projects that better the community overall. It's not just for highways. They can take it and build a neighborhood of low income housing and say this is going to better the community because there is a lot of poor and homeless people in this area and they can't afford the cost of living. So this is going to give them the ability to have a home so that they're not homeless and being a burden to the society. The community wants this in mass versus the few people who don't. So they have multiple ways of, evoking eminent domain if they choose to. They could do like I just said, they could take your building and say, well, we need this anyway because we're going to, make it low income housing and give people a place to live so that that's affordable and stuff like that. When eminent domain is invoked, if the courts uphold it, there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter if you've owned that property for 100 years. You can fight it to a degree, but it is a actual thing that, from the time this country was essentially founded, it is one of the things that has always been understood and accepted that we are a larger community in America and we do have to share. And what's best for the community as a whole is more important than what's best for one individual's rights. Now, that doesn't always apply, but for most cases it does. And that is one way that he can do this. But the courts would have to uphold it, and it would have to be legitimate. He would actually have to be, putting together a project that was going to benefit the community overall, which would mean he would have to improve the city, not make it worse, which for a communist is impossible because they don't know how to build anything. They only know how to just take and destroy. So he probably wouldn't win in the courts with that method, but there are some other ways that he could do this thing where he does take people's properties. And there's a couple things called receivership and foreclosures. And in this instance, typically the bank forecloses on you because you can't pay the mortgage. So they have the right to do that because it is their property. Technically, they hold the deed since they still own it and you own the debt on it. Once you pay the debt down, then you own it. The deed gets transferred. It's the same thing if you have a car and you're financing or leasing it or whatever. You don't hold the title when you pay it off and you pay that last bill and you own it outright, then you get the title transferred to you. Now it becomes yours. So technically, at any moment, the bank could just decide to take your car back too. But with foreclosure or receivership, it doesn't just apply to banks. It also applies to the government in some regards, where if you don't pay your bills on taxes or something, and it gets to a point where it's a significant amount of money, they could force the courts to approve the confiscation essentially of your property and put it into foreclosure because you owe all this money that you're not paying the government and that they need that money and they know that they're probably never going to get it out of you because you're not selling the building anytime soon. So that is another way that he could do this, where he says, we charged all these code violation fines to people. They're not paying them because they're protesting. Now we're going to put their building into foreclosure and take it from them and use the courts to kick them out so that we could have the building. With eminent domain, they have to give you fair market value for your property in order to confiscate it from you. But then at the end of the day, it's really not confiscation because they're paying you for it. So it's just a trade essentially. They're paying you fair market value, whatever the most amount you're going to get on average at that time and that market is. You're going to get that. You're going to get to take that money and run and go somewhere else and reinvest it. With a foreclosure, they don't pay you anything. They just take your building from you. I would imagine he'd probably go that direction. He would probably go the direction more where, he just confiscates the building through a foreclosure saying that you didn't pay the fines and we're going to take the building from you. Now, this won't work on every landlord because some landlords are going to have the money to pay the fines because the buildings make tons of money every year. Some of these really big high rises make millions a year in cash flow, which is pretty crazy in real estate because real estate's a game where you make very low margins, but it's consistent and it comes in every month without fail unless the tenant leaves. And it's indefinite. As long as the building is standing, you can make that money forever. Well, with with a lot of real estate, you really don't make much money. A lot of people like on the internet are telling people go out and buy a single family home, become a landlord. And what most people don't know is you really don't make a lot of money. I mean, even your average house, a 2 or 3 bedroom, 2 bath that you buy and rent out, depending on what market you're in, depending on the home price, depending on the rental prices, um, you're probably going to walk away with anywhere from $150 a month to $500 a month cash flow after all expenses are paid. And that's if you're actually doing it right. A lot of people would probably pocket more than they should and then have the property not get maintained well, and they would end up devaluing it and then they could charge less for rent. And it just is a snowball that ends up making the asset fail. And that's why a lot of people end up losing their real estate because they just don't know how to manage it properly. Not everybody's designed to be a landlord, by the way. Just like not everybody's designed to be a business owner, but everybody on the internet tells everybody to start a business or buy a business. You really have to know what you're doing and you really have to want to do it, have a drive and a passion to do it. Otherwise, you will most likely fail. 90% of all businesses fail within the first year in America, and 70% fail within the next 2 to 3 years. So, same thing with real estate, not the same thing, but similar-ish numbers where it's a high fail rate in the beginning because most people don't know what they're doing and they get into it on a whim, and then they fail. The ones who stay in long term, they learn along the way and then they get better at it. But, with like a single family home, you might make a couple $100 a month profit. With a huge building in Manhattan, you could be making millions of dollars a month or, per year or whatever. Um, Depending on the size and how many tenants and how many floors. And you would probably be able to afford those fines, even if the fines were astronomical. You know, you could get a code violation for a few $1,000s in Manhattan. And if they doubled it, it might be like 10 or 20 or whatever, 30 grand. If you're making millions a month, you could pay that easily. But there are going to be some landlords that can't do it, especially if the building is not producing a lot of money, got a high vacancy rate, which a lot of the cities still have not bounced back from COVID. Most of the country has already, but the cities, many of these offices, which is not really spoken about much today, but it's true, still have very, very high vacancy rates. They still have some of them are still 30% occupied, where they, maybe have people leasing the building, leasing the floor or a couple of floors, and having their company be headquartered there. And technically they pay their rent every month. And at this point, they're probably getting a discount on it because they have to keep them there somehow. But the floor is empty. It's vacant. Nobody's there. Nobody shows up to the office because they just don't need to anymore. Everybody works remote or hybrid. And so it's unspoken, but there's a lot of office buildings in the country that are very high vacancy rates still, 5 years after COVID. So this is all going to play into this with Mamdani, and he's probably going to use a lot of this stuff because he knows some of the landlords are already dealing with high vacancy rates still for the last 5 years, and they're struggling as it is. Then he's going to double the fines, and he's going to do all this work and charge them, high bills from these union contractors, and they're going to get to a point where they're really not making any money by paying all this stuff. So some of them are just going to end up saying we can't pay it, and then I think that's probably when he'll act and foreclose on them, or put a massive lien against the property and do everything he can to put pressure on them to either give up the property or sell the property to the government for a very low price so that they can do something else with it. Now, I don't know if, with the fire in California and with Mamdani in New York, if this is a strategy for them to push out certain landlords so that they could build these smart cities and reinvent the way we do cities going forward. I've said this in the past in previous video. Some people were saying it's going to happen in a year or two, and it's just not possible. Takes it took I don't know, maybe close to 400 years now to build Manhattan from the time the settlers came in the early 1600s, and that city is huge. It's massive. It's the biggest city in America, but it took 400 years to build. It would not be possible for them to build a smart city in a short amount of time. But this could be a long-term play to build these smart cities, and the first thing they have to do is push all these people out so they could commandeer the land and build into something new. I guess we'll see. But my point with that is if you're in New York, you want to really pay attention to what's going on with Mamdani and how he's going to be running things with this program and other things that he's going to institute because he is going to bring communism to New York in some degree. He's not going to get away with everything because this is still America at the end of the day. You do have, checks and balances with the government in terms of the different branches and how everything operates. So he's not going to be able to get away with whatever he wants. But he does have some power as the mayor to do certain things on his own accord, and he will definitely take advantage of that as a communist because his goal is going to be to destroy the country in his little way as much as he possibly can, do as much damage as he possibly can, move the goalpost of communism a little bit further as much as he can. And this is what you voted for in New York. This is what you voted for. If you didn't vote, if you did vote, or if you voted for one person, one of the lesser of the two evils over the other, you split it, you split your vote between Sliwa and Cuomo when this might have been a good time for the city to band together and vote overwhelmingly for one of those two people, just to at least have a fighting chance against the people who voted for Mamdani. So, but then again, this is what it is. I mean, New York City is a wicked place. It has been for a very long time. They literally have a place called Hell's Kitchen, and so many other things. So also there's a lot of, you know, um, bad things that have happened in New York for a very long time, and there are clearly evident some curses that have been put on New York. Now, I have a belief that some of those are probably lifted by now, but it's possible that New York is still under a curse or a battle to get back to being, the place that God created it to be. We'll see what happens, but that is the situation with Mamdani. Now that he's the mayor, the first, like I said, Muslim and communist mayor, we are going to see how that works out because it's also kind of contradictory. A Muslim does not agree with the things that communism is about. Muslims have their faith, and some of what they believe is extreme, and then some of it is very good about being family oriented, having big families, and their culture is to work together. If you look at New York City, a lot of the delis and small grocery stores are owned by Muslims, but they have their family work there. They have their family live with them. Many of them live, multiple families to a home, even if it's a single family home. So they do have some values that are sort of American in a way, but they don't align with communism. So it's kind of contradictory that this guy is a Muslim and also a communist. But if I had to guess which one of those is going to take control, because he at the end of the day he would have to choose a side on his philosophy or some of the issues that he believes in. Do I think he chooses his communist beliefs over his Muslim beliefs or vice versa? If I had to guess, I would say he chooses his communist beliefs. So he might only be a Muslim in name only, or a Muslim in how he grew up. But at the end of the day, he seems more like a communist at heart. And that's probably what his agenda is going to look like. So if you live in New York, good luck, beware, but maybe don't give up. Do what you can to fight against this. And when the next election rolls around, be prepared to vote overwhelmingly for something better than this. I give you a little grace because the Republicans really didn't have anybody good on their side that was a really big and impressive personality like Mamdani, which they should have fought harder to put somebody together. During this race, they should have really figured out who was going to be that next Republican voice in New York and who was going to be the one that they put up against Mamdani to hopefully win New York. And if there was a more polarizing figure, somebody well spoken like Mamdani, somebody who was charismatic, somebody who profess their beliefs, sort of like a Charlie Kirk, but, something to that effect. of the conservative side for the Republican ticket. But there's a chance that that person might have won instead of Mamdani because, you know, really didn't have anybody like that. You did have Sliwa, who was the Republican candidate, but he is a certain type of person, and not everybody likes, him or what he represents, even if they are Republican conservative. And so the numbers clearly showed it just didn't work out. But we'll see, how this goes between now and the next election, what he ends up doing to New York. Just beware, he is a communist and he is going to unleash his agenda. The next topic is the tariffs that Trump has instituted. They've made their way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is ruling on them soon, whether or not it's constitutional what he did by instituting them. Because technically, if you look at the Constitution, Congress is the one who approves and puts through any type of taxes imposed on the American people or on other countries through tariffs. And that's not what happened here. Trump used like some sort of emergency power executive order and was able to push through this tariff thing. Now, if he got a bill put together and it got passed through Congress, the House and the Senate, and it made it to his desk and he signed it, that would be a different situation. He would have every right to do that because that is the legal process of a bill, But that's not what happened here. So it made its way to the Supreme Court. Now they're going to decide whether or not what he's doing is constitutional. Now he's definitely he's pushing and promoting this a lot in the media that the tariffs are really good for America, and he's even going to I was going to tie into a different topic, but I might as well tie it into this now that he recently announced he's going to go through with the American dividend dollar, which we spoke about previously on this podcast, of giving Americans $2,000 per, I believe it's per person, not household. So if you're, a married couple and you both work and pay taxes, you're probably each going to get $2,000 check, so $4,000, and that I believe that's going to be untaxed, where it's 100% going to the people. So you might see a $2,000 to $4,000 check for your family within the next 6 months or so. Now, he's clearly using that as a bargaining chip to incentivize the American people to put pressure on the Supreme Court or the politicians or whoever to, not pressure, but, incentivize the Supreme Court to vote to keep the tariffs so that they side with Trump and he can continue his agenda, because a lot of Trump's success this year and continuing into 2026 is going to be on the tariffs. And the reason is because the government is bringing in billions of dollars in revenue from the tariffs that it's helping stimulate the economy. And then he also has tax revenue from the people. So it's like double the money. I think his goal, based on what he said, is to eventually abolish the IRS and replace the income tax on the people with the tariff tax on other countries. So now we no longer pay the bill, other countries pay it for us, and then we just pay sales tax when we purchase goods or services. And that is enough money to, take care of the economy and over time pay down the debt, which we've racked up as an ungodly amount of national debt in this country. Highest ever in American history. It's the highest actually ever in world history to our knowledge. And we're still standing, but that's not going to last long, especially if Trump, people that have conservative values, aren't in the presidential seat. The Democrats will just continue to inflate it so much that it will bankrupt us and we will fail as a nation. So he's looking to give the people this money to put pressure on the politicians and the courts to side with him, and it will allow him to continue his agenda. And if I had to guess now, I would say he gets to keep the tariffs in place because it is helping stimulate the economy and it is for the greater good of the nation, even though he didn't go about it the traditional way by going through Congress. But if he's able to get something in the works before they rule on this and get Congress to vote on it and actually pass a tariff bill where now Congress is involved in that, then that will be the constitutionally correct way to do it, where, it eliminates the Supreme Court even having to get involved. So he's probably working on that behind the scenes. And if the courts don't make a decision quickly, and they push it out for a little bit, then there's a chance that he might get that in the works before they actually rule on it. And then it eliminates them even having to rule on it so that there's no precedent set. Not to mention he'll get to continue his tariffs, which is a huge leverage for him over the opposing side. But it's good for the nation. We definitely need the tariffs. It's the correct way to do things. It's the way that it's always been done throughout American history. Up until the late 1800s, when they started instituting some of the stuff that eventually led to the income tax in the 1913, early 1900s, tariffs kept our economy stable. For the almost entire 1800s, America was doing excellently. There was, yeah, poverty here and there, throughout the country, and there were people who were, you know, doing what they could to make ends meet every day. It's not like we were a rich nation at that time. We're richer now, but people were fine. People worked, the man worked, and he was able to provide for his family. Whether that was just to put food on the table and, have a home to call their own, or whether it was to live a decent life and, really get to enjoy some of the finer things. Nobody was struggling to the point where they were absolutely destitute unless they just were not working. But the economy overall wasn't bad. Things were affordable, and it stayed that way for a very long time, decade after decade in the 1800s. Things were pretty much the same. It wasn't until the Civil War that things got crazy because, we dumped a lot of money into the economy and took on debt to pay for the war. And then eventually after that, we rolled into the Industrial Revolution, started stimulating the economy, but then we took on the whole, income tax thing with 1913 with the Federal Reserve, and then eventually World War One, World War Two. These dumped so much money into the country through debt to finance those wars. And then it just kind of snowballed from there to where we are today. Then eventually you had 1970, the dollar was taking off the gold standard, and things just really, inflated and got to where they are today. But for the entire 1800s, we lived off of tariff money and everything was fine. This country was running smoothly. It was growing at a very natural and smooth and steady pace, and things were going well. America was thriving, and we were a free country. We were doing, our best. There was a lot of innovation in the 1800s. Tons of things were being invented. They put an entire railroad across the country, 1,000 miles of railroad, and it transported all kinds of things. It exploded the economy, it exploded our growth. It eventually led to the Industrial Revolution. You had the telephone was invented. You had electricity was, discovered and harnessed with alternating current, and then, direct current. Well, direct current first through Thomas Edison. There was just so many things that was innovated during that time. And, life was beautiful for most people, but it really all changed with that, with going away from the tariffs and switching to the income tax, because now you took it away from the American people. I mean, you took it away from other countries supporting us, and then us subsequently supporting them by doing business with them through trade and helping their countries grow too, to putting it on the American people where it just messed up growth. It screwed up this country and it put everybody in debt to enslave us. So this was a bad system. We need to go back to the tariffs and we need to stay that way for the indefinitely, and it needs to go back to just Americans paying sales tax and tariffs and all other taxes abolished. I hope Trump gets to that point eventually where he does abolish the IRS and replace it with the, I think it's the ERS, External Revenue Service, if I'm not mistaken. And we need to continue on down that path because it will ultimately be the only thing that leads us to actually paying down the national debt. And then if we didn't have that 30 plus trillion dollars in national debt, everybody in America would feel rich, pretty much, because it would totally change the economy. Every American today walks around with like $200,000 worth of debt hanging over their head, even if they didn't even take out any debt, because it's all blanketed on us, paid. We're the ones responsible for owing it. So that burden is there on the American people and it gets taken out of our taxes. So even when we work, some people work, depending on where you are. I think in New York, you get taxed 55% or something like that. So you're losing more than half of your salary. So you work full time and the government gets to keep more than half of your earnings. already it's pretty much socialist in New York, but they don't do any of the work. You do all the work and you leave with less than half. In other states, it's bad, 30%, 40%. That's not fair to the American people. Imagine if you can keep all of what you worked for. You would feel like you had a lot more money, you were rich, you were doing much better, and you weren't struggling as much, and life would seem, much more livable rather than, you and your spouse working day and night, 40, 50, 60 hours a week each and just getting by, just living paycheck to paycheck. That's what most Americans go through today. But if the tariffs stay in place, that's not going to be a problem anymore. One salary will support a family again. You know, one salary will not only support a family, but give a family a decent life. It will give younger people the ability to afford a home again because we're in a crisis right now. Most millennials and Gen Zs are unable to afford a home. And there are many millennials that are in their 40s today and have never bought a home because they literally have never been able to afford it, or they just couldn't get themselves into a financial position where they were ever ready to make that decision because of other factors. So we're in a crisis. The tariffs will definitely save us from that. And I hope the courts rule in that way. But if they don't, that's okay because they are also doing what's constitutionally correct if they so choose. But then I hope Trump puts something together with a bill with Congress and gets them to pass a tariff bill because we need to keep this in place. So we'll see what happens. That hasn't actually been decided yet, but we'll monitor it. And when it does get decided, we'll report it back here on this podcast. The last thing that ties into this that we're going to talk about is the other court ruling for the Supreme Court on the welfare system. So recently, Trump canceled, I think it's SNAP is the program, but then some other affiliated programs as well for Americans and non-Americans that had been living off the welfare system in this country. That's another huge thing that has been burdening Americans, which is another reason why it's so hard for people to make a living, support a family on one salary or even two today. I think it's up to somewhere between the bare minimum you have to make is $160,000 a year in order to be living um, where you're not living paycheck to paycheck anymore. And then to be living comfortably, I think it's like 250,000 a year in order for a household to be living comfortably where they could have a decent life, own a home, have one or two cars, go on vacation 2 or 3 times a year. You know, these numbers are astronomical compared to what they used to be. And most Americans don't make that much and probably never will. So it's really become a nation where you have a rich class and a poor class, and there's no more middle class. And that's been going on for a while now in this country. But we're finally pretty much there. There's still a little bit of a middle class, but we're getting to the point where eventually there won't be anymore if things don't change. And the poor class is being supported by the rich class. So these welfare programs, somebody's paying for them. It's the taxpayers. The average Americans that go to work make whatever amount of money they make, they're contributing to other people deciding we are not going to work because by choice, and we're going to live off of the government system because we choose socialism, and the Americans will pay for it. Well, that's eventually a losing battle because if people do that, more and more people say, "Why am I working so hard when I could do like these other people and live off of the government and they just pay all my bills and I claim a check and I just don't go to work, but I have to, let my life fall apart so that I can prove that I'm disabled or something to be able to qualify for this." So everybody starts doing it. But then who's paying for it? Somebody has to go to work to pay for those who won't, right? Eventually what happens is the whole system collapses and then everybody's living off the government. But now you're not getting what you want. You're getting what they give, which is nothing, which is the bare minimum, which is just enough for you to survive. And now you're all slaves in a machine. That's what eventually will happen with the welfare system. The welfare system was never designed to take care of people who don't want to work. It was designed to take care of people who absolutely can't work because of whatever factors are in their life, usually health related concerns. And the reason that is, and it is a good thing to some degree, is that, as a Christian nation, we're supposed to take care of our fellow man. If there are people who are struggling and actually can't work, we're not supposed to just cast them aside. We're supposed to help them. We're supposed to take care of each other, you know? And if somebody is disabled or, mentally or physically or just, unable to work, we should band together as a society and take care of those people. And this works really well with the health sharing, which is typically a health insurance program set up by Christian organizations where everybody pools their money together, pays a monthly bill to, this insurance pool like you have health insurance, and then when people actually need it, you draw from the pool. And it only goes to the people who need it for real. That way, everybody's not, just screwing around and taking the money. But it's a way for us to also help each other out so that if there is anybody who genuinely needs it, they get it without any pressure or burden to, pay tons of money just to be able to survive because they have a health issue. That's a noble way to go about that. The same thing should apply for the welfare system. If there's anybody that is absolutely disabled, there could be a fund set up like the welfare system that everybody pays into every month, like we do, and it only goes to the people who are proven to not be able to afford to you know take care of themselves mentally, physically, whatever, and are absolutely incapable of working. And I don't think anybody in America who has a heart would have a problem with that because it's the noble thing to do. It's the right thing to do. We take care of each other when we're in a time of need. But if you're just living off the system because you don't feel like working and you're gaming the system, not only is that not fair to the American taxpayers, it's actually morally wrong. And it is essentially a sin. It's, not listed as a sin in the Bible, but it is in the sense that you're using people for your own gain and being selfish. And that is something that is not going to end well for you from a spiritual standpoint. But what's even worse, what's been going on, which they've discovered, is that most of the people that are utilizing this welfare system today, didn't always used to be this way, but under Biden it changed, are immigrants. They're people who are not American citizens. Now, if you're not an American citizen, you're not entitled to the same things that Americans are. But we've seen over the last few presidential terms, some presidents have allowed illegals to vote, which they constitutionally cannot, and to enjoy some of these entitlement programs, which there's no constitutionality because they didn't exist back then. But they're not supposed to because they're not American citizens. Well, they've changed or modified the laws to be able to allow them to. And now you have the majority of people, I think it was like 80, 90% of people that are on the welfare system are not Americans. They're foreign born and they're milking our system and taking our taxpayer dollars and living off of it or sending it home to their country. Either way, it had to be stopped because this would eventually really financially devastate the country. And it only puts the burden on the taxpayers even more so. So it's a good thing that he stopped it, but now it went to the Supreme Court. And now they have to rule on it, whether or not what he did was, right, and can he get away with it? Now, for this one, there's no constitutionality about it because these programs didn't exist back then. So I don't think that they're going to be able to say no, as long as, he's not breaking any laws that are already on the books and nobody knows all the laws except the judges when you go through them. Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens with this one. It hasn't unfolded yet either. It's still in review. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this episode. This is a special 100th episode of the podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And don't forget to, stay tuned and see what's going on. We got a lot of stuff going on. Stay for the ad at the end. Get your Christmas orders in sooner than later and stay tuned for the next one. All right, everybody, I just want to take a moment to promote my children's book. This is Little Boy Full of Love. That's me on the back. And this is a little sneak peek on the inside. It's a great book. It's a children's book. I actually wrote this for my son. And it's available right now on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, Bookshop.org, and a lot of other online platforms. But more importantly to me, it's actually available in a lot of bookstores throughout the country. You can find out which ones are closest to you on my Instagram page. We highly recommend that you shop local, buy from a local bookstore. So if you are looking to, get a children's book for you or anybody you know, or even with the holidays coming up, it's a great time to, buy a children's book as a gift. Definitely get it from a bookstore that's local to you. But if you absolutely can't get it from one of the bookstores that are currently carrying it right now, and we're in about 15 or 16 different states across the country, so it may actually be in your state, and it could even be local to you. But if you can't get it from the physical bookstore, check out our Amazon storefront. The book's available on there right now, and like I said, with the holidays coming up, you may want to do your Christmas or Hanukkah or holiday shopping early, and you can even order it from our Amazon storefront and ship it directly to whoever you're gifting it to. But it's available on those platforms, Amazon storefront and bookstores and other websites that I mentioned. But I want to take a moment here to look at the storefront just to give you an idea of some other stuff that we have available on there. These are products that we highly recommend. They are things that we use in our daily lives, and it's all organized by category. So it's a lot easier to, shop for the holidays and specifically for things that interest you, particular categories. Available right now, many different items on our storefront. If you can see here, 61 items just in women's apparel, fall decor, because right now we're in fall, 26 items, kitchen items, baking specifically, things for around the house, children's toys, even stuff for parties. If you're trying to save money on a party and throw in your own, occasion, you can even buy some cool gadgets here to help you, put on a better party. Health and wellness items here, even stuff for Christmas. And there's the book right there. So you can get it from the storefront. You can get it from the bookstores, like I mentioned. But it's available on all these different platforms. It's really easy to find and gift to somebody. Also, I want to show you the apparel shop, and these are some clothing items that we actually produced. So if you're looking to get some cool apparel items, shirts, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, leggings, even accessories, cell phone cases, women's makeup bags, fanny packs, coffee mugs, all different types of stuff, even some, art, all different categories here, apparel, homeware, accessories, drinks, even digital items. It's all on this store, healthybodygoodssoul.com. Anything that pertains to you or somebody that you're looking to get a gift for the holidays. A lot of great designs on here, a lot of cool designs that we actually custom created. Stainless steel water bottles, especially now with the fall and winter. A lot of cool hoodies and long sleeve shirts. This is a really cool one, I think, for women. The original Be Your Soul apparel, that one's actually really popular. People tend to like that. This one's one of my favorites. The free shirt. It's the American flag and it says free and that says not property of the United States government. That one's pretty cool. Got all different types of tank tops, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, tote bags, coffee mugs, even some items for kids, backpacks. So if you're the type that likes to, plan ahead, I would definitely recommend ordering from the Amazon storefront or the apparel shop within the next couple of weeks to get everything in time for the holidays. Use code SAVE15 on the apparel shop to save 15% off everything on the storefront. So order within the next week or two and you'll definitely have everything in time for the holidays. Definitely check out all the links to everything, the Amazon storefront, the book, and the apparel shop in my bio on all my platforms, Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify. But you can also find them in all the show notes for every episode that I post and get all your orders in time for the holidays. All right, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps the channel continue to grow. And put in the comments things that you would like me to talk about and make videos on for the future. And I will definitely do my best to do that. Stay tuned for the next one.